Nearly a century and a half after its conclusion, the Civil War remains the central event in American history. I am Eric Foner, the DeWitt Clinton Professor of History at Columbia University. I have taught here since 1982, and my research and scholarship has mostly focused on the period that this course will be covering. If you want to know where the world you're living in came from, you need to know about the Civil War era. How the national state, the national government got to be as powerful as it is, how we went from slavery to a period of great equality and then a retreat from that into a period of considerable inequality. That helps to explain the civil rights movement and in a certain sense helps to explain how we elected the first black president in American history. This new online series explores the history of the Civil War and the reasons for its continued relevance today. The first course will deal with the 1850s. It is called A House Divided because that is the story we're telling, how the United States divided into two societies, one based on slave labor, one based on free labor, and careened toward the greatest political and military crisis in our history. The following two courses in the series cover the conduct of the Civil War itself, the coming of emancipation, and the struggle after the war to breathe meaning into the freedom acquired by the 4 million slaves. What you will see in this course is me teaching my lecture course on the Civil War and Reconstruction to Columbia University students, but in 10-minute segments with quizzes, polls, activities, and illustrations from the Civil War era interspersed. Every week we will feature filmed lectures, conversations, discussions, and more. And every student online will have the opportunity to interact personally with this material and with me and my teaching assistants, all of whom are historians in the making at Columbia University. I grew up in a family of historians. My uncle, Philip Foner, was a very prominent historian. My father, Jack Foner, also a historian. My family was more of an old left 1930s kind of family, but also understood some of the inequalities in American life, particularly the importance of race, which very few people were talking about outside the black world. So I just grew up knowing that this was a fundamental problem for American life at a time when very few white people were talking about it. It's also the world I was growing up in the 1960s, you know. I mean, in some ways, my sensibility was shaped in the 60s, as most people were who lived through that decade. I actually wanted to be a scientist, an astronomer. And then I took a course with Professor James Shenton, a great legendary teacher here, on the Civil War era. Shenton made us understand that you couldn't really appreciate what was going on in the society without looking back and seeing the deep history of where this came from. Finding an inspiring teacher like that was what made me think that I wanted to be a historian. At Columbia, the most important figure in the history department was Richard Hofstadter. A brilliant historian, a brilliant writer. Hofstadter really emphasized the importance of writing for an audience outside the academic world. So it was somehow this combination of Shenton and Hofstadter. Merging those together was the sort of model one might want to aspire to. In this course, we are getting a certain kind of history that has been developed over the decades in the Columbia History Department. A history that tries to bring together political history, social history, intellectual history. And Columbia History Department has a long tradition of reaching audiences outside the so-called ivory tower of the university. This particular MOOC technology enables me to reach probably more students than I have in my entire career.